All right, we are live. Great. Okay, welcome back to Senate Education on January 6th, 2:15. We have Secretary of Education Dan French joining us over Zoom. Mr. Secretary, good to have you with us.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to the new makeup of Senate Education.
Great.
We'll look forward to having you in person at some point, but just why don't we just quickly go around the table? You and I, of course, know each other. Senator Gulick.
Hello, Secretary French. It's Martine LaRocque-Gulick, and I think you know who I am, so. Hi.
Nice to see you. Hi.
Nice to see you.
Oh, Secretary French, I'm Nader Hashim, representing Windham County. Nice to meet you.
Likewise. Thank you.
Terry Williams, representing Rutland County.
Hi, Senator Williams.
And David Weeks, representing Rutland County.
Okay, good to see you. Yeah,
Well,
I would just say I look forward to being in person as well. So thank you for accommodating my remote connection today.
Oh, yeah, no problem at all. Thanks for joining us. We just thought this would be an opportunity for you to talk to us a little bit about the agency, give us some overview, introduce yourself, as well as I think we have some questions, some preliminary questions as we're starting to build out the agenda for next week and going forward. So the floor is yours. And I think you emailed us a document. Is that accurate?
Yes, in the spirit of introduction, I thought I'd just share some of my background information. Some of you know me better than others, so I thought I'd just take advantage of the opportunity to say, firstly, I look forward to working with you, and just wanted to share, some of my background in case you're wondering. I find often education in particular is one of those things that people reflect on in their own experience. Often, we've all been to school, one form or another. And that experience influences how we think about schooling going forward. So thought I'd share some of my background in that regard. Just by way of just quick summary, and I sort of point to some themes. I won't share this out, but I think you probably have access to it. I started out as a high school social studies teacher.
Second, everyone in your online, you can find this information. Does everyone have a laptop or computer with them?
Would you like us to get on right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's.
I can put it on the screen if you'd like, Mr. Chair.
Print things up, or we can always just use our laptops and iPads. But for now, yeah, if you put it on the screen, that would be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
I don't have screen sharing abilities, but at the moment, anyway. Yeah, this isn't, it's always interesting sharing your personal information, but it's not meant to be that exciting, but let's see. Okay, can you see that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. So, I just lift off, general summary of my experience as an educational leader in Vermont.
We're not seeing anything yet. It just says Dan French has started screen.
I think I'm locked up, actually. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to see if it'll free up. But I'll just talk about this. Again, it's in, you'll have it in your files. But I started my career as an educational leader, going back even further as a teacher in Colebrook, New Hampshire. If you're familiar with that, it's up in the sort of the Northeast Kingdom area of New Hampshire. We call the North Country. I was in the military and discharged from the Army. My wife's a teacher, and we moved to northern New Hampshire. I think you might be able to see it now.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, great. So that's where we ended up, northern New Hampshire. Didn't think we would stay there that long, but spent about 15 years up there and really enjoyed the lifestyle. But I started as a high school social studies teacher. My background's in world history, Asian studies. I was a Korean linguist in the Army. Ultimately got into school administration and then crossed the river into Vermont in 1997 with the advent of Act 60. So that's one of the themes I'll highlight. I've been an educational leader in Vermont, really with the advent of some major policies. Act 60, started my career as a principal, explaining Act 60 to our taxpayers up there, and then more recently as a superintendent in Southern Vermont with Act 46. So I've been around for a while. But I did spend about 15 years in the Kingdom, which gets a lot of media coverage, not so much my career in Southern Vermont, which is probably more important relative to my development as an educational leader down in Senator Campion's area. But I did spend quite a bit of time in the Kingdom. It's an area I enjoy and I think I know fairly well. Ultimately became the superintendent up there and then moved to take on a bigger organization in Southern Vermont, in Sunderland, Vermont, the Bennington Rutland Supervisory Union, which is centered essentially in the Manchester, Vermont area. It includes 4 counties. It's fairly large, what we call multi-district supervisory union. Was there for 9 years, and this is where I did a lot of work on with Act 153, the precursor to Act 46. Did a lot of work in technology, which I can talk about more. But it was really an enjoyable experience, and that's where I still live today. My wife's a teacher in one of the schools in that district. I left being a superintendent in 2016. So at that point in my career, I would say, intellectually satisfied that I understood the work of a multi-district supervisory union, was looking for other things to do, and really enjoyed teaching. So I was kind of recruited by a friend to go work at St. Michael's College, where I ran the school leadership graduate program. It's basically a program that licensed principals, curriculum directors, special ed directors. It also, while I was doing that, teaching courses in educational leadership, I was also working as an organizational consultant. I'd been doing quite a bit of that from a technology standpoint, but particularly around the time of Act 153, Act 46, which is our school district merger work. I was doing a lot of work as a consultant on the side when I was teaching around mergers and helping districts hire new superintendents or implement new information systems. But it allowed me again to work statewide, which is a theme, I think, of my leadership, that I have some familiarity with many regions of the state, a lot of the schools in the state. Actually, the area of the state that I've probably the least familiarity prior to being secretary was the Chittenden County area. I did some work in St. Mike's and that ecosystem, but for the most part, I've worked in the Northeast Kingdom and Southern Vermont. But one of the great joys of being Secretary of Education in the state is you do get to go out and visit different schools, and it's definitely one of the best parts of my job. So if I were to summarize it just real quick, some themes as you get to know me a little bit. Again, I think our experiences lead us to think about education still today. Again, I've been involved in pretty much all the major policy initiatives going back to Act 60 and up through Act 46. And of course, as secretary, I've been involved directly in all the policies since 2018. A lot of my work, a lot of my leadership prior to becoming secretary was around technology, innovation, modernization, things like distance learning, pushing a lot of district processes to the cloud when cloud computing came out, things like teacher evaluation or purchasing, HR. I did a lot of those modernization and IT system implementations. Again, it works statewide. Important strand, I think, to identify is that I was a leader of the Superintendents Association, was a trustee of their organization, president and superintendent of the year. Of course, a better part of my experience, if I reflect on being secretary, I thought Act 46 was probably going to be the most controversial thing I would be involved in starting in 2018. But I think easily COVID-19 and the response to the pandemic is by far and away the most complex piece of work I'll probably ever be involved in as secretary. More recently, I've been involved at the national level. People who do my job nationally, there's one of us in each state, and we have an organization called the Council of Chief State School Officers, and I'm a board member of the national organization. So in the last couple of years, I get more involved in sort of national education issues. It's amazing when you get that perspective, how diverse the states are when it comes to education. But in summary, I think, if you were wondering what my background is education, I would qualify it as being a utility player. Other superintendents who've worked with me would probably say that. I know a little bit about a lot of things to be dangerous in most things related to education, but I was a solid instructional leader. I was a pretty good classroom teacher. I enjoyed teaching a lot, but I also I think my major area of focus is on organizational systems, governance, basically all the sort of back office areas that enable good things to happen in schools and in classrooms. So I'll stop there. Any questions? Be happy to engage in other topics. I can talk more about the agency, Mr. Chair. You want me to talk a little bit about?
Yeah, that would be great if you would say a few words about the
Yeah.
agency, and then we'll take some questions. And also you have two colleagues here. I don't know if you want to introduce them, but we also have a couple of your other colleagues. We have Jessica Carolis and Jill Briggs Campbell coming in.
Oh, great. Yeah. So we'll start with Jessica Carolis, who you'll see quite a bit of. Jess leads what we call our Pathways division inside the agency. So the Agency of Education has about 160 employees. We're organized into divisions, and I can go through that in more detail. Our divisions have 20 to 30 staff usually, and Jess is one of the key leaders of a key division inside the agency that we call the Pathways division, which includes a wide variety of things, including CTE, adult learning, flexible pathways. We'll talk about Act 77. So a lot of the core curriculum issues like literacy and so forth, Jess manages. So one of our key leaders. And Jill has been one of those other important, I'll call her utility players. That's not to diminish her contribution, which has been significant. Jill, if I remember correctly, was hired right when the pandemic started. We've had a number of those types of hires in the agency where, we hired people for one thing in the beginning of the pandemic, and then their jobs totally changed into something else. So when Jill was interviewing for her job, which she manages our federal grants, particularly related to the pandemic, I wasn't able during the interview to say, oh, a pandemic's about to start and we need someone to help us manage vaccination programs or testing programs, or enable total remote work of our agency. So she's been a really important player in our COVID response, as been Mr. Fisher, who I see sitting there as well. So Ted Fisher is the Director of Communications and Legislative Affairs. So be happy to talk more. Just in general, the agency, we basically implement the laws that are enacted around education. I mean, that's our chief responsibility. Education's unique to a certain extent compared to other state services that were mentioned specifically in the state constitution. So education, there's basically two things we attend to. One is quality of education and the equity to ensure all students have access to high quality education. So that's our chief responsibility. We do that work as described by laws. So what we do, what we don't do is really the laws that are passed by the General Assembly and acted into law with the governor's signature around education. And a lot of the like many states, Vermont isn't alone in this regard. We would call ourselves a local control state. So part of what we navigate is what is a state responsibility, again, which is a constitutional responsibility in Vermont. On the other hand, we delegate a lot of authority to local school districts. So a better part of what we do is manage that delegation of authority. So we're accountable to you, to state government, to the public, to the federal government. The federal government's an important player in education. At the same time, we manage and support our local school districts, who have a lot of responsibility and authority on the day-to-day basis to achieve educational outcomes for kids. So there's a lot of work inside the agency. It's a very complex area of policy, I find. I think education is probably one of the most complex areas of policy because everyone, is very, very interested in education, whether you're a parent or a society member. And it is a very complex, it's a very regulated area of policy. So we're regulated, considerably at the state level, but also at the federal level. So it's a very, very complex policy space for a lot of ways, but also a very exciting one. And I think increasingly in the last, from a historian's perspective, in the last maybe 50 years, and certainly the last 20 years, education is increasingly acknowledged as being sort of the important crossroads relative to economic and social development. So maybe it's because we're in a knowledge-based economy. Maybe it's because with technology, we're getting closer to our goal of being able to meet the personal learning needs of each person. But education is increasingly very important. So it's always been important to a certain extent, but when I look on my experience as secretary, I'm as secretary and the Agency of Education is always more or less in the middle of some sort of policy conversation around social or economic development of the state, because it just acknowledges the importance of developing our most important resource, which are our citizens of our state. So we've had a great partnership with the General Assembly. It's been a key ingredient to our success as a state. Our ability to work together is a great strength of our education system. So I look forward to doing that with you all in the coming session and the coming years.
Questions for Secretary French? Secretary French, one of the things, I'll just jump in and I have two questions. When you're coming in, we know next week also to talk about some of your agency's priorities, but tell me a little bit about how you describe when people ask you how Vermont is doing with regard to education. You're at a national conference, you're talking to people. How do you describe it?
Yeah, that's I was with you up to that point until you said at a national conference, because that is very challenging, I think, because there's a great diversity among the states in terms of how we enact education. I would start with, we can talk about outcomes for kids, which are very solid. For example, the only national measure of comparison for academic outcomes we have is something called NAEP, the National Assessment of Education Progress. Vermont's consistently in the top 10 of states in that area. So historically, we're known for having really good outcomes for kids. We're seeing the same challenges that other states are in terms of some groups are continuing to perform well and other groups are falling behind. That's not unique to Vermont. But I think, overall, people acknowledge that we provide a high quality education system. I think right next to that is acknowledgement that we have one of the healthiest states in the country. So we take care of our kids. Our kids are, relatively speaking, in good health. And that's an important precondition, no doubt, that contributes to our academic success. I think we're also known for our what we call personalizing learning, because we do operate at a scale that allows us to do that. But I think it's not just the scale. It's we've historically, like going back over 100 years, have had a really sort of ethical, if not philosophical, commitment to progressive education, that we put the individual at the center of the learning process. And John Dewey, who was a Vermonter, that's very much in our DNA as an education system. So that's an important variable. I think increasingly, when I talk nationally, it's about our civility and how, in spite of what you might see as contention at local school board meetings in Vermont, and I would say, sadly, I've spent a better part of my adult life attending school board meetings. I think it's been very rewarding, but also very challenging. Our school boards work very closely with their communities, and I think it's a great strength of our education system, honestly. We see divisions, we see some of that contention, but it apparently is not on the same level as we see in other states. So as much as there is politicization of some of those processes, it's not what we're seeing in other states right now. So I think we're known generally, and I credit the governor for setting a tone for that too. We tend to, when we do disagree, it's on a very civil basis. And I think our students have benefited greatly from having very involved parental support and well-staffed school boards supporting their communities in education.
So when folks ask you the areas that you think are kind of weak in our educational system, what do you usually say? Because I agree with what you're saying, but areas of improvement.
Yeah, I think, there are, I'm thinking of things that could be verified in data, not just Dan French's perspective. I think the cost stands out immediately. Like, we're one of the highest spenders in education. So the issues of efficiency, those have been a major concern for political leaders like yourselves for many, many years in Vermont, really starting around 2000 as the number of students started to decline. How do we maintain quality where we don't have good economy of scale? We have very small schools that are geographically separated. It's hard to get efficiency in such a configuration. So I think that's a perennial concern, the cost of education, and how do we get better efficiency out of the system. I think, as a someone who's been around school leadership development in particular, I'm concerned of the turnover we see in the system, and I would say disorganization, but the flip side of a strong local control system is that we don't have a well-articulated education system. It's a very decentralized education system, which again has its pros and cons, but one of the definite cons of that is the inability to stabilize sort of leadership. We have a lot of turnover. I think typically we see about 30% turnover of principals in the state, and I think that's playing out now. You'll hear, I'm sure, a lot this session about staffing issues. But I think, particularly the pandemic's been really hard on educational leaders and superintendents and principals. And I think it's really hard to sustain that in Vermont. Because we have a lot of small districts, we tend to work in isolation a lot, and that's it's really hard to achieve good outcomes for kids if you don't have stable leadership over a number of years to keep a steady hand on the tiller, so to speak.
Where are we with the teacher shortage right now? I know we entered a period where we lost a lot of teachers, we've lost a lot of principals, superintendents. Have we made any progress?
Yeah, I don't know. I would say progress is probably not an accurate paradigm to describe it. I think we're definitely feeling the pressure of the larger demographic trends that started pre-pandemic, right? So Northern New England is an aging population, and we, as you're well aware, we have staffing shortages in all sectors of the economy. Certainly, I think the pandemic was exceedingly challenging in education, and that's exacerbated those trends. So firstly, we have a lot of stories. We are trying to quantify that. So we have commissioned a formal study of our education workforce. We've hired a national consulting firm who does a lot of labor analysis. So APA Consulting out of Colorado. That report should come out this session. So that would be a good starting point, I think, for the General Assembly, is to look at the actual patterns and the numbers, and because it's a tricky thing to unpack to a certain extent. You could talk about shortages, and that's certainly important, but another cut of that would be to look at the licensing status of people. So we have a lot of districts that have teachers on provisional licenses or emergency licenses. So yeah, we have people filling slots per se, but they might not be as fully qualified as they were previously. I can tell you from a secretary's perspective, as I traveled around this fall, which I was able to do more of this fall than last year with the pandemic, it's inconsistent when I go around the state. I'll hear some people say we're fully staffed and we're doing all right. Other people are not, really struggling. I think a consistent response I'd receive regardless is that the recruitment pools are very shallow. So there's fewer candidates, even when people are able to be successful in hiring staff. They have far fewer candidates in those recruitment cycles. So areas of special education in particular come up as an area of concern. So I think, districts are operating on a pretty thin margin right now across the board, but some places are quite stable and other places are really struggling.
Senator Machine.
Thank you. I just had a quick question, Secretary French. When it comes to the pool of applicants, are you seeing that people are not applying just because they saw how challenging things were during COVID, and they're just saying, that's not a profession I want to go into, and they're just seeking something else?
The rationale, I think it's all of the above, perhaps, but there's just fewer people. We saw that when I was working in St. Mike's, and we see it nationally, there's just fewer people entering the profession. So, and that trend started before the pandemic. There's reasons for that, I'm sure, that why teaching is perceived as an attractive profession or not. And certainly fewer teachers leads to fewer principals and so forth. I definitely think, to your point, that the pandemic wasn't a good recruitment tool in education. For a number of reasons. And but what I'm seeing when I talk to superintendents in particular, they don't necessarily have a good understanding as to why there's fewer, but they will say consistently there are fewer applicants. For example, even one of our wealthy districts, let's say, that has a good compensation scheme or a better compensation scheme for teachers, they're seeing a fraction of the applicants for a position than they would have 5 years ago. They might have had 100 applicants. Now they're seeing like 10, that kind of thing.
Senator Weeks, Senator Williams, Senator Bullock, any questions right now?
Nope.
Secretary?
No.
Senator Shingill.
I'm good, thank you.
Secretary French, one of the things we're going to be working on is trying to provide the committee with a real understanding of what it's like to be educated here in the state of Vermont. What is it like to arrive here, a couple kids, elementary school or pre-K, and those kids make their way right through high school. And we have a great committee assistant who's a Spalding High School senior who's here on Flexible Pathways. And so we're going to engage and take advantage of him being here to help us with that. But I'm wondering who are the kinds of people that you would recommend us talking to that could really give us a look into what it's like to be educated in the state of Vermont. I agree, test scores do give us some indication, and one of the reasons we worked on literacy was because we weren't knocking it out of the park. We're still not, but a lot of states aren't. So we looked at those and we tried to take some steps to improve literacy. How else would you help this committee really kind of come up with almost a baseline? Like, okay, this is where we're at, and this group wants to look back. We all want to be those of us who are going to have grandkids saying, "Hey, when I was on this committee,
Yeah.
okay, things got better."
Sure. Yeah, it's a great approach. I think, I would encourage the committee to embrace the diversity, a sense that there is a diverse experience in Vermont, so as much as you'll be tempted to listen to a single person or a single region, you need to acknowledge that, there's a great diversity across the state. Anyone who starts working at the state level really starts to see that. You'll hear that from our staff, that, certainly there's a consistency of experience in ecosystems. I'll use the phrase ecosystem. So I think that would be an important lens for you to, as a committee, understand the different ecosystems of the state. So you might say, okay, Chittenden County, the education experience is this. What does that look like in the Kingdom? Or what does that look like in Newport versus St. Johnsbury? What does that look like in Pownell? There's an incredible diversity, for good or for worse. But I think increasingly we think a lot about our policies from an ecosystem perspective. So that would be an important lens. I think another one would be just think about the system on its basic components. Think about elementary school or elementary education, what that involves. Think about middle level education, think about high school. And those are themselves very general categorizations, but they're ones everyone's familiar with more or less. So if you think about elementary school and the foundational skills about literacy, as you mentioned, getting kids off to a good start, shall we say. What is that experience like in different parts of the state? It varies again. And you can't really say one's better or worse. There's places that, I was in Brownington the other day. If you're familiar with the Northeast Kingdom, my car still has the mud on it to show the experience. Wonderful school, up in the heart of Orleans County, doing a great job getting kids off to a good start. That looks fundamentally different than the Chamberlain School in South Burlington, but both have incredible good experiences. I would bring a critical eye to the middle level experience. I think that's an area where I would encourage you to explore more of. I think we do a good job getting kids off to a good start for the most part. I think where the equity for me starts to manifest itself pretty quickly is at the middle level. When I think of things like arts education, I think that would be an interesting thing to probe a little further. What are those experiences for kids at the middle level in the arts, the exposure to like advanced math and so forth. I think those are areas where we struggle. We're able to justify the small school configuration at the elementary level because they do perform wonderfully for the most part. But we tend not to offer a robust program in all areas of the state at the middle level, and that's an area I would think more about. And I think the flexible pathways paradigm is a very useful paradigm to contemplate the transition from middle level to high school to career technical education on the other side of that. I think the relationship between things like CT, high school, are useful to explore. I would encourage you to think about it from a pathways perspective. And one of the things we like to think about, and this is challenging in a small state because of the geography, but we would like to build our education system around meeting the individual needs of each kids, like Hayden sitting there, you know. But how do we build in that flexibility while at the same time operating the system? We need some stability and predictability to do that. But ideally, kids would be able to move in among the various pathways that are available to them. Most of us, including myself, don't really know what we want to do with our lives when we're 16 years old. And the more we can expose kids to options and opportunities, the better. And that's what we should endeavor to do in the education system. So, you know, that's a sort of a general response, but I would encourage you to think on the regional variations anytime you get a question around, you know, if you're looking at pre-K, for example, think about it on a regional variation. Don't assume that one policy is going to fit all areas very well, and that's a challenge in our state, that we have to sort of differentiate our policy and get the right incentives, the right supports to ensure the policy makes sense in Brattleboro as much as it makes sense in Milton, you know.
Yeah. Anything else? Anything else from you, Mr. Secretary? I know, again, we're seeing you next week. I just wanted us to, you know, say hello, talk a little bit, but this has been a very helpful introduction of you and your agency.
No, I thank you for the opportunity. You know, I should say again, you know, I think a success for us, and particularly, I should have responded, Mr. Chair, to your prompt around nationally. I mean, one of the things I think we're known for is our pandemic response in particular. We've had one of the best pandemic response, and when I say the best, we can quantify that very easily in our numbers. I think one of the reasons we did that is precisely conversations like this. We work very closely together, the executive branch, the legislative branch in the field, and not to say there's not conflict and dissent, but at the end of the day, we are able to formulate a very responsive approach that generally works out pretty well on behalf of students. So I look forward to working with you, as does my staff. You'll see Ted around, and Lindsay. I don't know if Lindsay's there. There's Lindsay. So whatever we can do to help, you know, just let us know. And you know, the governor's speech the other day outlined some sort of general approaches. You'll hear more in his budget speech on specific issues, and I'll be in next week to start talking about some of those specific areas where we'd like to make some progress. But you know, we're here to help, and look forward to working with you in the coming session.
Likewise. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Secretary. Great.
Take care.
Take care. We have a little time. Is Ledge Council right outside? Yeah, why don't we have Ledge Council, just so we can, we don't want to keep people any later than we have. We have 10 minutes, so we're going to have Elizabeth St. James come in and introduce herself. Beth, how are you?
I'm well, how are you?
Doing well.
There's one seat. Jess, I'll give you.
So before we turn it back over to the agency, we have a couple of minutes. So I thought we would say hello to you. Elizabeth St. James, Beth St. James, is our Ledge Council. She will be in again next week to talk to us on a number of different issues, but just thought it might be nice for us to go around the room so you can get to know folks a little bit, and then for you to introduce yourself.
Sure, I am gonna put on a mask.
Yep,
You've all
absolutely.
seen my face.
Yes, yeah, whatever people are comfortable with, and I should have said that, whatever people are most comfortable with. I know there was an email that COVID is still out and about, as it will be. So would you like to say hello?
Sure. Hello, Beth. I am Senator Martine LaRocque from Chittenden Central. And do we do more than that?
Oh, that's great. It's terrific. Yeah, yeah.
Hi, I'm Nader Hashim from Dummerston, representing Wyndham County.
Terry Williams from Pulteney, and I represent Rutland District. Dave Weeks from Proctor, representing Rutland.
Great.
I know you.
Yes, we do know each other, and I can speak to how incredibly talented Beth is as an attorney, as a drafter, as a resource for all of us. And as you all know, she works for all of us, whether you're on this committee or not. So I might come to her and would love to say, geez, I'm not really trusting Senator Williams and what he's going to put in. Can you tell me? Of course, she's not going to do that. She's your attorney as much as she is mine. And of course, I trust you immensely, Senator. But, that kind of client privilege is something that we all respect. So do you want to just say a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My full name is Elizabeth. So my email starts with an E.
And you prefer Elizabeth or Beth?
No, Beth,
Okay, Beth, okay.
please. But I do go by Beth. You can call me either. It's fine. But the email throws people off. This is my second session with the legislature, but I am not a new attorney. I've been around for a little while. Prior to working with the General Assembly, I was chief prosecutor at the Office of Professional Regulation. I managed a team of attorneys and staff, and we prosecuted licensees like nurses and veterinarians and tattoo artists and cosmetologists, if you can believe it, who violated professional misconduct laws. And then I actually went to law school on the West Coast, and I worked for the Attorney General's office in Oregon for several years doing child abuse and neglect cases, representing the state. So this is very different for me. As you can tell, there's nothing about education in my background, but you will all quickly learn. It's a quick study. This work, you will become experts in no time. So I enjoyed my work with this committee immensely last year. This is a really interesting subject area. It's a very varied subject area. And if I can't answer your question on the spot, I will get an answer for you. As Senator Campion said, I do work for everyone. And so the way I like to think about it is I follow the bill, not the committee. So you will see me, you will see other attorneys. For example, right now, I am not the attorney who's going to do the PCB work. If that's something this committee takes up, that'll most likely be Mike O'Grady. There's another attorney who does all of the tax stuff, thank goodness. And tax and education finance go hand in hand, so you'll probably see Abby Shepherd. And then I was listening as you were all talking about your priorities, and I know childcare and pre-K came up, and historically the attorney who handles education matters and one of the attorneys who handles the health and human services matters, Katie McClin, we've kind of tacked pre-K together, so you may see her as well. So we follow the bills. If I'm the drafter on the bill, I follow it through. And that also means that if someone wants to draft an amendment that is completely opposite to what we were talking about at 10 o'clock last night, I'm the one drafting that. And that's where that attorney-client relationship comes in. I'm not going to call you and say, well, guess what so-and-so wants me to do. You'll find out about it on the floor, just like everyone else. But I think that could potentially throw new members off when they see my name on things.
Tell me what you mean by that.
Like if this committee, if I've shepherded a bill with this committee
Oh, sure.
for months and months and months.
Yeah.
And then on the floor, you see something that's exactly the opposite of the work we've been doing with
Yeah.
my name on it. That's just
Yeah.
my job.
Sure.
My
Absolutely.
job.
Senator Goulart.
Yeah, you brought up childcare and early education, and the two of those get conflated and also get lumped together sometimes. Will childcare bills be here or be in health and welfare? And will early ed be here and not there?
It depends on the substance of the bill.
Okay.
So right now, the pre-kindergarten statute is in Title 16, which is education, which is kind of my baby. Basically, if it's a Title 16 matter, I'm going to be the attorney assigned to it, most likely. But because the system is split right now between private and public, there's a lot of joint oversight. So it depends on the bill, it depends on the purpose of the bill, it depends on the substance of the bill, of where it's going to go.
Yes, Senator Weeks.
Do you cover both the Senate and the House? Or-
Yes,
Okay.
yep. So
Good.
all education matters. I'm one attorney that's assigned to all the education matters. So that leads to scheduling conflicts occasionally. This committee has historically been very good at scheduling. Very good at scheduling, but yes, I also cover all the education matters to the House.
It's a big job.
So you'll see it crossover, all the work I've done in the House, I'll duplicate here, and all the work I've done here, I'll then go and duplicate in the House. It's not really duplicating because you all have your own agendas and work to do on it, so.
And we're going to have Beth in again next week to talk to us about all sorts of things related to education law. And as I mentioned earlier, some of the bills that we passed over the past couple of years, just to give people a sense of where we're at.
I was just gonna do the last biennium. I'm gonna go back any further than that.
I mean, as things pop up
Mhm, of
over
course.
the next couple of weeks, if people want to review anything, we'll absolutely have you.
Sure. Anything else you want me to say about my role with this committee?
Anybody else have any other questions for Beth at this point? And we'll see you next week, but just wanted to, and again, if people have drafting requests, you would email Beth.
Yeah.
Directly, and, yeah, she does a great job.
You can email me for any drafting request, even if it's not education related. Our drafting requests are dispersed. I just put it in a central repository and then they get assigned, so.
Oh, I didn't know. Okay,
Yep.
great, great.
So I'm a
great.
friendly face.
Yeah.
St. James at Ledge.
So for example, Senator Williams, we were talking about a tax, if we were to lift the tax on Social Security, for
Mhm.
example, he could email you that drafting request,
Yep.
goes into a bucket, and then you kind of distribute.
And then our
somebody will
director,
Okay,
Director
so it doesn't
Carvey
have
will
to just
assign
go
it.
to the tax person.
Nope.
Okay.
you can email me anything
Good.
and I'll make sure it gets to the right person.
Okay. Questions? Oh, no.
Okay. All right. Well, it was a
Nice
pleasure
meeting
to meet you all. I look forward to working with you and I will see you next week.
Okay, thanks very
Thank
much.
you.
Have a
Thank you.
nice weekend.
You as well.
Okay, two more things that probably hopefully won't take too long, but we're just gonna get a quick update on literacy. We see Jess, did she just step out?
She did all just down the hall.
Beth is a terrific attorney, really talented. I mean, all of our attorneys, really lucky. People always say, they get the summer off. It's a big job.
Yeah.
It seems like it starts earlier and earlier.
Hi, how are you?
Hi,
Good to see
yes, please.
everybody,
Have a
yes.
seat. Good to see you.
I heard a rumor that maybe Wi-Fi went down, so I brought some copies for folks.
Oh, copies are great.
That's
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Not ideal. I know, but
Well, this is our first meeting. We're still figuring out how we want to sort of follow the work, whether it's gonna be on our iPads, et cetera. So
Okay.
this is helpful.
so there's two documents. One is actually just the PowerPoint that we thought we were going to show, just to give you, to spotlight some of the things. This, you might be wondering, is this a Russian novel that I've given you to read? It is not, but it is 6 pages, so I apologize.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Homework for the weekend.
Okay. All right. Well, we, as you know, this is our first committee meeting, and we thought we would hear a little bit from you, Jess. Would like you to introduce yourself and your colleague, and then talk to us a little bit. Give us some history around the literacy work that this committee mandated and where things are at.
Sure,
That'd be
great.
terrific.
So for the record, I'm Jessica Careless, I'm Division Director of the Student Pathways Division, and I'm joined by my colleague.
Hi, I'm Emily Lesh, and I am the Act 28 project manager.
And Act 28 represents.
Represents the act that your committee worked on to improve literacy
And
outcomes.
just so you know, this is a group of completely new senators.
Congratulations,
Which is exciting.
Thank you.
And new to this committee as well.
Great, great. What I'm really excited about is I actually get to bring like physical evidence of some of our activities embodied in
Good.
Ms. Lesh here. So I will say there are some things on the document that I've just shared that I don't necessarily need to go through in the background and rationale, but it's there. in case it's helpful to you, but that just pulls some language from Act 28. But I would love to just start with an overview of our activities to date, with the understanding that you might want to do a deep dive in some of these things. Offer stands, we'd love to come back, particularly there's issues around data, around Act 173 levers. Can't fit it all in. We do have some presentations, so we hope you invite us back. So if you turn to page 2, this is where I'm going to start. And what I've done is I've organized the update under 4 headers, which were directives from the legislation, from Act 28 to the agency, what you were looking for us to do. And because this is going to be ongoing work, this is not a one-time thing. This is an initial update. There's some recommendations at the end. Again, those are developing recommendations, but we'll continue to organize this under these headers just so you can track our development over time. If that works for folks.
And just to also set the table a little bit, you can correct me or add to this, whatever you'd like. The committee 2 years ago did hear from teachers that didn't feel as though they were equipped to teach reading and writing. And we also were concerned with the percentage of students that were not reading and writing at grade level. And we heard from a number of different people from around the country that talked to us about, once you're behind, it's really hard to catch up. And we thought, okay, let's start to address this issue. And that was for the committee's charge. Is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that's great. And I think the context within that is we are a proficiency-based state. And outside of the sort of technical components of being a proficiency-based state, I would just say it means we believe deeply, and actually the Student Pathways Division oversees lifelong learning. So it's cradle to career and beyond. Adult education, adult career technical education, also live within that division. And so in a proficiency-based state, our commitment is always going to be, we have no law preventing an adult from getting their diploma. So you can be 89 years old and say, I want to get a high school diploma, and you could even enter a high school. So our commitment is that, yes, some folks might be behind. I'd like to say that people develop proficiency at different rates over time.
Sure.
And what we're focused on right now, put recovery aside, is accelerating learning for those folks who are ready to accelerate their learning and for those who might need some additional support. And I think that's our commitment, and that's some of the work that we've been engaged in. So under the first header of recommend how federal funds can be used to implement, and this is referencing another act, Act 173, in the context of improving literacy outcomes. And as you become familiar with some of these bills, if you're not, Act 173 was a separate piece of legislation that was passed in 2018, but there were some specific recommendations related to literacy. And so again, that's about supporting all students, including students who struggle. And so there were some recommendations around literacy. So under this heading, one thing that we did, we started over a year and a half ago, is we established a cross-divisional team within the agency, and it represents all 6 program divisions. So divisions that oversee multi-tiered systems of support, early learning, special education, federal investments, the list goes on, licensing, right? All of those teams are represented within this cross-divisional work group to make sure that when we're thinking about literacy, it's not siloed, right? We're talking about literacy whole scale, and all of the things might go into supporting literacy. This team was meeting on a weekly basis. We've moved, after 1 year, we moved to a bi-weekly basis.
Can I just ask a clarifying
Sure.
question? When you're talking about literacy in silos versus looking at a holistic picture, what does that mean? I'm not sure. What
Sure.
silos
So my division was charged with managing Act 28 and that the sort of initiative and implementation of Act 28. But the early learning team sits in the Student Support Services division. And so having representation from that team within this cross-divisional team to make sure that we are moving as one agency versus a collection of teams that might be developing supports, technical assistance divorced from each other. So what is our stance to literacy? How are we promoting literacy as opposed to having some of those communication gaps that might happen when you have a large organization?
Thank you.
You're welcome. So we're now meeting on a bi-weekly basis. We also are hired a project manager, which I was really excited about, and onboarded on June 20th. And we do have 2 Emily L's in the division. So if I do default and refer to her as Lesh, you have not fallen into an episode of Starsky and Hutch. It's just a habit that I actually developed on purpose. So people know who I'm talking to. We also, within this bucket, developed that communication stakeholder engagement. So we have regular coordination meetings with Gwen Carmoli, who you may or may not have already spoken with, but you will. She's the chair of the Literacy Council. All of members of the team, the cross-divisional team, attend those council meetings. We've been providing technical assistance on evidence-based practices. We've been presenting to some of the membership organizations, BICLA, the Vermont Superintendents Association, the Vermont School Boards Association, and BICLA is the Vermont Curriculum Leaders Association. And we also are going to be doing some presentations in some novel spaces. So for example, we're making some investments in early warning systems, which are critical infrastructure within schools to make sure that you're aggregating data to give to teams and individuals to respond quickly and in time. And that's something that was called out in Act 28. We're going to be hosting a tabletop exercise on February 22nd at VitalLearn to talk with ed tech coordinators about that. And then finally, obviously in recommending how federal funds can be used, we have done a scan of continuous improvement plans and recovery plans and other investments. You might hear more from Jill with specifics and maybe some, we'll just give you the down and dirty, which is nearly 100% of SU's SDs identified priority investments to support literacy. I say nearly 100% because I want to own that if it's not 100%, it might be because we were doing a manual scan. So we might have missed something, but I would feel comfortable saying 100%. And what we found was that generally there's 4 categories that they're investing in. Professional development, and just to make a connection to Act 173, there are 4 levers that we've identified for meeting the goals of Act 173. Needs-based professional learning is one of them. Programs and or curriculum, coordinated curriculum is also a 173 lever. ELA literacy coordinators or coaches, and ELA interventionists. And in the DMG report, they talked about having high quality staff who have some expertise. So I think that it shows that our SUs, SDs are really making some thoughtful investments.
So I would say, so I this is completely new to a lot of people, just high, overview, not too much, at this point, we can always have you back.
Yeah.
And I'm going to suggest the same when you come in to talk about ESSER, just if the questions asked are, for example, have you started to make a difference? Have you started to train teachers? That kind of thing could also sort of be helpful.
I love that you asked this very large question, but then you just want a high level. What do you feel about life?
Right.
In 3 words. I would say this. The biggest difference is that I think we have seen a lot of excitement, energy, and focus at a state level around literacy as a result of Act 28. And I think that's really been helpful. I think you'll recall too, and when Act 28 was in development, there might have been some conversations around, I think initial, one iteration was like, let's have a grant program. And I know I had been like, let's not have a grant program because we have grant programs and that just happens at the local level. We'll just iterate what we're seeing. So I think also having a new tool, which is an investment stream to have statewide contracts, professional learning, investments, so that there can be commonality. I think that is really energizing for people in the agency, and I think people outside of the agency.
Yeah, and I frankly, I would love for parents to say, one of the reasons we're moving to Vermont is because kids are learning to read early and it's just connecting. I mean, education, it's so important for everything we know, but it's also an economic development tool. It's also, hey, I want to live in Vermont because this is where people are knocking it out of the park with regard to literacy and other things.
Yeah, and Emily, one of the exciting things about having Emily on board in all of the sort of perspectives that she brings to bear is we were really wanting to make sure that we had that workforce voice and has some extensive experience in Colorado and some workforce development bills. And so we know that when schools open, the economy is open, right? When childcare is open, the economy is open. And so we know that plays an important role.
Senator Weeks, did you have your hand up?
I did not.
Okay. Please.
No, the only thing I would say is just, cautionary around acronyms. But I know, Jess, that you defined some of these, but even like ELA, does everyone know what that is?
No, I think every time, yeah, as
Yeah.
much as you can.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure,
And even for
absolutely.
me, honestly, this is all.
And even for me,
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah.
at this
All
point.
of us.
Otherwise, we'll start
We're in
using
trouble
acronyms.
now.
Yeah, so ELA means English Language Arts, right? So we talk about literacy, but we also have English Language Arts standards, right? And so, it's not just, 5 skills, right, as recommended by the National Reading Panel related to literacy, but then how do we have connected literacies? How do we develop connected literacy? So you're talking about literacy and application, right? And English Language Arts is sort of an example of that. So the next heading, and there's only 4, we were tasked to recommend evidence-based practices in teaching literacy instruction to students in pre-K through grade 3, pre-kindergarten. So since then we have, and I just provided hyperlinks. So I think you have the digital copy and you can just access these quickly. There is one missing hyperlink and I'll explain why, but you can see there's 20 evidence-based resources that we've developed. If you've read the council report, there's recommendations in there that actually have already been executed. Maybe were executed prior to the drafting of the report. And there's some things that are actually linked. Some of the annotated summaries that are here are relating to those evidence-based, the very explicitly identified resources that they want to see for inclusion. We find, and particularly curriculum leaders, and you understand why, because they wear so many hats, is if we're really proud that we produced a 10-page document, they're like, can you put it in 2? So we have those annotated summaries so that we can direct them to the most salient pieces versus clawing through a bunch of research. So we've done that.
So if somebody asked me on my way home, Act 28, this is what's happened. This is the document that can really tell people what you have all accomplished.
This
so
is a
far.
summary of what we've been doing.
Been
I don't know if
okay.
it tells you
The story
the
yet
story
of what's happening in the local, if somebody says, well, what's happening on our local elementary school? Has it reached the local elementary school?
I think some pieces have.
Okay,
I think what we'll get to a piece that might speak to your issue
Okay.
about how do we learn about what's happening at the local level statewide.
yeah, okay.
One of the other pieces, and again, this was related to one of the reasons we attend the Literacy Council sessions is so that we can be as efficient as possible. So as we hear conversations happening, we like to step back from that and say, okay, we heard people were really interested in this. How do we pull that together?
Mhm.
So we are developing an evergreen web space that will support some of the recommendations that I think are captured in the report, particularly posting evidence-based practices, putting it in a static document, particularly something like our literacy plan, the blueprint, which is our literacy plan. You're in a constant cycle of updating it. So instead, to have a click out to a space that you can continue to update without having to worry about the next revised posting of the PDF on the website. It also will provide us an opportunity to post an ingestion point for ad hoc questions or requests that come from the field. Lots of research articles you can't get because you have to belong to an online service. And so that will provide us an opportunity to get the information to folks who are requesting it without necessarily having them have to pay $160 a month to belong to a particular service.
So if I was just hired to teach first grade and I arrive, and it's my first time teaching, and I'm really not sure what to do in terms of reading and writing,
Mhm.
what's the agency gonna do?
So
Is there somewhere where I can go?
yeah, and this
to
is what we're
learn?
developing,
Okay,
this web
great.
space. So we're posting evidence-based practices. We're gonna
Okay.
have this intake form, and then we're gonna be hosting, we've got to sort of figure out how to staff it, but it's gonna be bi-monthly or monthly, essentially open sessions, right? So that folks can come in, engage in collaborative problem solving, not have to necessarily put stuff in writing, talk to a human being to talk through any particular issues. That's also a great opportunity for us, both the intake form, but also those sort of office hours, is to say, what are trends that are developing so that we can target how we develop technical assistance or support based on what people need, not what we think they need, right? Because the thing that you want to do is not say, here's help, but say, what does help look like to you?
And so if I'm that first grade teacher, the agency's gonna reach out and say, hey, Brad, this is here for you.
Yeah,
They're gonna
Yeah.
let us
that we
know.
might even be able to pull down a research. I mean, obviously we can't post it on the website because we don't want to run afoul of things like if if there's a paid article, we're not going to download it and then make it publicly available because we'll hear from
Right, but
Riley.
you know,
or
I don't think people have time to, I
But-
mean, I want somebody, what I was hoping out of this, you can tell me if it's moving in this direction, is an opportunity for me to watch somebody talk about it, to experience a teacher, to say, this reading and writing is a complicated thing. You know, how to teach it is, you know, there are a couple of different ways to do it. Are they getting that, or are we just saying, here's a great article for you to read?
Well, again, just sticking
Please,
with
yeah.
very specific recommendations.
Yeah.
This is just speaking to this issue of saying, how do we access evidence-based resources,
Mhm,
right?
Okay,
So, and if I get to the end
yeah, which I will let you.
and you
I
still have
promise.
questions.
All right, sounds good.
I will stay until I answer.
All right,
So that's what we're addressing.
yeah,
The next piece on the next page is we're continuing our collaboration with the Region 1 Comprehensive Center. So the federal government contracts with organizations to provide technical assistance to state education agencies. So like departments and agencies of education, just like we provide technical assistance to LEA's, local education agencies. So as you might recall, we engaged them to complete the literacy syllabi project, a study of our educator prep programs. We have continued our partnership with them, and we are developing and we'll be facilitating a community of practice. So it's a type of professional learning space that we will be providing to education leaders and their teams, again, around those evidence-based practices and improving literacy instruction. The reason why I include the leaders too is that the blueprint is talking not just about, we don't want to just get to literacy practices in the classroom, but you want to talk about how can systems sustain the structure to promote consistency in those literacy practices. So you want to have that system level, multi-tiered system of support component, as well as the classroom instructional practice component. So we hope to launch that at the beginning of the next fiscal year. We did hear from the field that they're feeling pretty tapped out with all of the activity that's going on across the agency and within the field. So the next thing that we're working on is we're developing a blueprint playbook. So taking the literacy plan, the state literacy plan, and turning it into a set of stackable resources to implement that plan and to develop your own local literacy plans. Yeah.
Senator
Is the literacy plan different from the literacy blueprint?
No, they're the same.
Okay,
The
great.
blueprint is the shorthand. You know, we like to make things really clear by calling the same thing 3 different names. But yes, it's a good question. And that's a confusion. So that would be a recommendation I would make to in our next iteration of the blueprint, is to be very clear that it is the state literacy plan with maybe a subtitle as the blueprint. And then also with the Region 1 Comp Center, we deployed and are looking at our first scan of the results, a literacy survey to every single district. We had 82% of our districts complete the survey. And all of that was asking questions about assessments that folks are using at the local level, programs that they're using at the local level, training of staff at the local level, what they're seeing coming out of educator prep programs, or who's applying for programs, how are you attracting talent. So we're hoping that a lot of that is going to not only determine and inform both the blueprint playbook and the community of practice, but going forward, also all of our investments around professional learning, right? So that we can target and be really thoughtful, again, getting to that, what do people need, not what we think they need.
How are you gonna get the remaining 20% that didn't return?
Probably call them.
You are, okay.
I mean,
Because I suspect
But-
those could be the schools that are the most
Yeah.
stressed, have less time to do this stuff, and I'd hate to see them disappear.
Yeah.
So, I mean, is that a plan? Is that gonna be something?
it is, but I can
Okay.
also say this is actionable data, right? So it is sufficient to be able to
Okay.
represent that, right?
Okay.
And what we don't want to do is not close the survey and wait, right, and delay the playbook, the
Okay.
community of practice, right, those investments. So this is actionable data, and we're just going to continue that outreach and be thoughtful of the fact that, yeah, people are
Senator Brewer.
doing a lot of things.
Presumably with 82% having come in, I'm assuming you got
That's like 42, 43.
a wide variety of rural and urban.
Oh, yes.
and-
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Super.
Yeah. So some additional things, and again, around that, best practices, et cetera. We have a request for proposal drafted for statewide model curriculum for English language arts and literacy. Again, because we go through the procurement process, so what we get back will be determined by the bidders, but we've set a substantial portion of funding aside to do that. This comes after exploring for probably the last 15, 16 months, different models of that around the country. A lot of states are doing that. Again, this would be, SUs can elect into it. We don't mandate curriculum at the statewide level, but we know developing your own curriculum is really challenging at the local level. So you're going to purchase something off the shelf, and sometimes by that point, it can be stale, and it might not reflect your community values. We're also in the
Just for new member, I mean, we do mandate standards. We have Vermont
We mandate,
standards that people,
absolutely.
You need to be doing right, you need to
Yeah,
do this, you need
yeah.
to take this.
But curriculum
Right.
is the
How it's
content,
taught is a
the
different thing.
the
Right.
assessments, the instructional practice, et cetera. We're also in the middle of the procurement process to select a vendor for professional learning coaching related to local comprehensive assessment systems as it pertains to literacy and math. We've drafted a request for proposals related to those early warning systems. So not only we are going to train folks about early warning systems, which is what is the data you need to collect, but not just collect, have it talk to each other
Mhm.
so that it can flag up when you need to intervene quickly, but also to tell folks about how you might have to change your student information system, which is where those data collections come in through. We also launched the competitive benchmark assessment grant application to support locals investing, expanding, growing their local assessment systems in literacy and in math, but that produce measures, Lexile and quantile measures. This is not the only measure of a skill set of a student, but it does allow for local assessments then to connect to state summative assessments, which has been the gap, right? People wait for the state summative assessment. We don't want people waiting. They have a lot of great data at the local levels through their local comprehensive assessment system. So if you want to connect that, we're trying to encourage folks to develop or buy benchmark assessments that report in those measures. And then finally, we've continued our participation in the CCSO, that's the Chief Council of State School Officers, Early Learning Network Improvement Community. We talked a little bit about that last year. We can come back and give you some more detail. But this is all work to support that evidence-based decision-making, evidence-based practices.
Very exciting.
Great,
This is so great.
great. And I know there's a lot here. I swear I will blow through the rest. So, okay, recommend how to provide professional development for teachers and school leaders and methods of teaching literacy. I do not need to necessarily go in depth because I presented last year and it was right on the cusp when they were actually finishing up the project. We hadn't gotten the report yet. But this was that project with our Region 1 partners to evaluate educator prep programs and do that literacy syllabi project. We had 6 out of 10 participate.
6 out of 10 institutions.
Institutions, yep,
So our state in Vermont, so this could be St. Mike's decided not to, or
yep. And we did, that's blind to us.
it was just blind. So yeah.
We
6
followed the same
institutions.
model as Massachusetts.
And sent them a bunch of questions around, tell us a little bit about how you.
Sure, so what they followed a process, and again, I think this could be a whole little presentation,
Okay,
but just real quick and dirty.
yeah,
They follow a very prescriptive process that was established to train people to review all of the syllabi, looking for very specific indicators.
interesting.
Then they also conducted interviews so that they could have that qualitative kind of empathy interview go with that qualitative scan of the syllabi. And generally what they found, so the 6 represent about 60% of the educators in Vermont who would be coming out of the special education, early literacy, elementary. We didn't do the full bore. And what they found is, Emily, I don't know if you have it in front of you, but do you want to share just sort of the quick findings?
Yeah, sure. So overall, they found that the reading programs that were evaluated, that 10 out of 10 of them hit, the 6 of them all hit 10 out of 10 of the essential elements that are critical for reading comprehension. So they use these matrices that look at 10, that identify nationally evidence-based practices, and there are 10 essential components to reading instruction.
Mhm.
And so in their scan of these syllabi, they found that the all of the programs that were evaluated from the 6 institutions hit those 10 critical elements. Some of the recommendations for next steps, which Jess will get into, but I think that it really is a scan of the syllabi. And so it just does that scan. And then for writing though, that's where they found it was three. Yeah, thanks. 3 of the educator prep programs scored between 5 and 7, or they hit 5 of the 7 critical elements. And then there were 3 that were 5 and below.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
But we do have a presentation on that, so we can come back. if
Yeah,
you wanna
that'd be
do
great
it
to
like
come back
a-
to
a
somebody. Yeah,
deeper
yeah.
dive.
But that's interesting. That's helpful. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So that's pre-service, and then in-service, and I know sometimes in-service can be like a term of art, but I just mean teachers who are teaching right now in the classroom, professional learning. We are still, but very close to the end of a procurement process for those online PD modules, which we are very excited about, which we are hoping we will have for 5 years in an online learning space. They're self-paced. So in thinking about that transition of someone coming out of a pre-service or someone coming from a new district or from out of state,
Yeah.
there'll be a tool for education leaders to just have people engage in some training around literacy instruction and best practices without necessarily having to eat up your in-service time and those rare times that you have to collaborate. Really excited,
Great.
looking forward to sitting in front of you saying they actually now are live.
They exist.
We also have developed Vermont Early Learning Standards training modules. We will also host those in that online space. Those are completed. We're really excited about that. We're in a procurement process for professional learning for family engagement and literacy. We know that literacy doesn't just happen in school. We know that literacy across the lifespan. We know that in fact, actually families play a central role in early literacy along with our early learning providers. And so this is a contract requesting that folks can go into school systems to develop family engagement and literacy activities so that families can continue some of the learning when they're at home and in that third space.
So parents could learn.
Yeah,
Also.
yeah.
Great.
And be doing some of that work.
Great.
And then I'm not going to go into the network improvement community. And I will just say, this is where also we're really leaning into that community of practice. So that's going to be professional development that will happen. And again, we're hoping to engage people regionally so that not only are we maybe bringing experts in and facilitating learning, but they're starting to learn from each other best practices, which I think is essential. Lots of times you can be out there and you feel alone. So in the final category, recommending policies, procedures, and other methods to ensure that improvements in literacy outcomes are sustained. This is, again, just all developing. This is not fast and hard. So the initial recommendation from the Literacy Syllabi Project, you can see it there. There are 4 recommendations. We tabled these for now. We are continuing our work with R1CC, but we did make the decision that based on the context that we were in, that in looking at what we would need to do in order to pursue these recommendations, we felt like it would have a greater impact to focus our partnership with them on in-service teachers right now and the professional learning and the investments that we needed to make to support kids right now with teachers who are in the classroom right now. But we will be returning to that. That's on our sort of trajectory with them. We also are looking forward to on the 10th, on January 10th, we're going to see our first sort of summary and visualization of the survey results. And we're really looking forward to taking that and crosswalking it with, we also released a survey in the field in the fall around local assessment practices, and crosswalking that to sort of determine next steps. And then we are developing and expanding those local assessment assets, because again, we want to give folks what they need in order to talk within their local education agencies, their SUs, SDs, but also how they can use local data to talk to the state in a way that isn't a Tower of Babel, but maybe it's somewhat of a common language. So that's our update.
Woohoo.
A lot there. And you're now full-time
Yes.
as in our literacy point person in a way. Emily, is that something?
So we have a team, as Jess described. We do have this great collaborative team approach. And so I'm the project manager and helping to really connect the dots across the
Yeah.
agency.
Because we did, Act
Because
28 did mandate, right?
Either a contractor or a
Yeah.
limited service position. And the project management side, so I talk about contracts, those have to get, the request for proposals
Yeah.
have to get written. Lots of times if you have, as most of the time we have an IT solution, a web-based solution
Yeah.
that involves the Agency of Digital Services, that can become its own workflow. So Emily has really been not only greasing the wheels and sort of connecting folks, but also having to sort of sustain that common, constant focus on things like the family engagement literacy activities, RFP, and those processes.
So we'll have you back, I'm sure, but this was a good solid overview,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And we have some information to
Yeah.
review.
Yeah.
And probably in the next couple of weeks, we'll have you back and get a
Absolutely.
little bit more of an update.
And I did want to convey too, I
Yeah.
did meet with the Wendy Geller, you might recall, I come in with
Yes.
her before, her successor, Amanda Gorham, who oversees the data management and assessment division.
Okay,
The invitation, Glenn Bailey sits on our Act 28 team to come in and provide for you the presentations on our data that we presented to the council, but also to talk about fiscal year 22 data. So that invitation I'm extending on their behalf.
thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Congratulations again.
Thank you.
Good to
Thank
see you all.
Great to see you all. Thank you.
Nice meeting you.
Break before it starts?
We have a hard stop at 4:00, but we will take a 2-minute just stretch. That would be great and clear our minds.
Quickie.
Or, we can come back.
I know.
It's just a race, just
3:35.
forget everything.
Right.
Gonna run to the bathroom.
Great.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah, great
seeing you. Did you get my like swim